Welcome to the Rare Slot. My name is Rands, and these are the bonus episodes of the Booster Pack podcast. Now, the Booster Pack, that's the show where I unwrap the stories and crack the mysteries of collectible games each and every episode. But here, on these bonus episodes, the Rare Slot, you will be able to hear a more casual, laid-back, kick-back conversation about a collectible card game-related topic. Whether that's one suggested by you guys, the listeners, whether that's something that is just happening in the space around us, or if that is just something that I've come up with myself, something I want to talk about. And once you hear what our topic is today, you'll realize that it's the latter there. Yes, our topic is top 5 personal favorite collectible card games that are no longer printed by their manufacturer, or for short, top 5 dead collectible card games. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the term dead collectible card game or dead trading card game, it basically means that the manufacturer no longer supports the game. They're no longer releasing new sets, and they're no longer supporting organized play. They are no longer servicing that product at all. And if you're a collectible card game player, I'm sure you've experienced a game like that you've loved that has since fallen by the wayside and become a dead collectible card game. Now, as I said, this is a pretty self-indulgent topic, so I've invited on the foremost YouTubers about specifically dead collectible card games. They are from the YouTube channel deaddecks, and they are collectible card corpse lovers. That's right, they're probably the internet's foremost collectible card game necrophiles. Welcome to the Booster Pack, Harry and Richard. Fellas, how you do?
Doing well, Rands. Thanks for having us.
Doing good.
Well, we're going to talk about some of our all favorite games, but before we do, I want to sort of just chat about your channel. I love your channel. It's got a real loose energy that I'm hoping we can bring to this episode as well today. So tell me a little bit about how it got started, and give me just like a little overview of your sort of collectible card game history personally, without giving away too much what we're going to talk about in our top 5 lists.
Well, we've been doing this since May of 2021. It was actually my wife. She was my fiance at the time, girlfriend, that suggested we get into the YouTube side of it because we've been sitting around talking about cards, playing with cards, and just hanging out and bullshitting about it. And she's like, well, why don't you just do something with that and make it into a YouTube channel? So okay.
And you can drink at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, drink at the same time.
That's
It's
right.
kind of our shtick, that and the Cubs bet. So we decided that we'd go ahead and move forward with that. We didn't know what to do, how to do it, or anything. And Richard actually found an eBay listing that had a bunch of loose sealed packs and starter decks and stuff like that. And we ended up getting it really, really cheap, and that ended up propelling us to start the channel.
Awesome.
I mean, we've both been in the collectible card game world since the mid-90s.
Well, the reason I wanted to invite you guys on is you are a little bit older than me. You guys started playing a little bit earlier than me. And not only are you guys experts in dead deck collectible card games, but you're also from that slightly earlier generation. So I figured our lists would not cross over as much and have a ton to talk about. Maybe a little bit between the two of you, but let's jump in.
Go for it, man.
All right, let's go. So we're going to be counting down the top 5 personal collectible card games. Now, that is not the ones that we recommend or think that the gameplay is the absolute best or the ones that you should try. These are personal favorites. So for us, it's going to be just what we love. And I was really surprised when I wrote down my list. When I started my list, there's so many that I could have chosen from.
Yeah.
I love this genre so much. And what I did is I was just like, right, what I go do is step back and really just only focus on the ones I really was personally involved in growing up and things that made me fall in love with the diversity of the genre. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So before we jump into it, let's go with number 5, our 5th collectible card game top list. So we're going to start with you, Harry. You tell me what your number 5 is and we'll talk about it.
My number 5 is Tempest of the Gods.
Interesting.
It's to me, it's one of those that it harkens back to the early days of the collectible card game, where there's a lot of magic involved, both literally and figuratively, because there's a lot of magic artists that were involved in the game. And to me, it has that feel of early Magic the Gathering. It really encompasses the early card game feel. The gameplay, I thought, had a significant amount of potential. The balancing issues were, to me, the biggest problem with it. That and the glossy cardstock, but I really enjoyed the artwork on that, and I thought the gameplay outside of the balance issues was pretty cool.
I fully agree. I think that the art on that game was so good. It was as good, like you said, as Magic, because they had those same artists working on it. And there's card layouts and stuff like that. Might not be as vibrant, as colorful as Magic, but they definitely look like that sort of early. They look like they're strongly inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's a fantastic choice for number 5. Do you have an opinion on Tempest of the Gods there, Richard?
It's good.
If it's one on your list, let us know.
No, it didn't make the cut. It was considered. I didn't have near as many as you. I had like 15. I mean, this was really damn hard. So.
I know, right? Cutting it, it's really hard to get down. So, like I said, I had to make a couple of personal rules for it.
Yeah.
And I believe if they had another set or two to kind of iron out all the issues with the gameplay, I think it could have been something pretty spectacular, because it was relatively unique in their gameplay mechanics.
Yeah, do you want to just give us a brief overview of how it relates? Because it wasn't one of those ones that was quite an exact Magic-like that we saw like from Towers and Time and stuff like that in the same era. So do you want to just give us a bit of an overview of what it was like?
Yeah, it's you have it's god based. So you have your demigods, your was it gods and priests are your 3 main, and then you have your followers that you use to bring out all your anything that you need to bring on the battlefield. And you actually had a battlefield in the middle where everybody would fight. And the biggest problem with all that was your opponent couldn't attack unless you laid down a priest first. So if you got priest screwed, you couldn't get a priest down, then and your opponent builds up, then as soon as you lay a priest down, it's game over, because then you would just get run over. And that's the problem we ran into when we were trying to play this game, is that it was really easy to get just beat down quickly, kind of like getting mana screwed in Magic, But the gameplay, you had your temples where you could put all your characters into, and it's where you cast your creatures into was your temple and your kind of your safe zone. And I don't know, it was just really unique. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So.
Yeah, dude. Some of your characters being your primary resource producer is different.
Yeah,
that's really the big switch up. Yeah.
So I've experienced the cards. I haven't played the game myself, but it is one that I've always been curious about. And again, like you said, it looks gorgeous. So that is number 5. I'm gonna go next for number 5. I think I am gonna let you know. Now, mine's a bit weird, actually. I had to dig back and cut a few things from my list, but I made a personal choice, and it's one that it had 2 sets in the year 2000 it released. It is the Sailor Moon trading card game. Now, that is designed by Mark McKinnon, and it was published by Dart Flip Cards here in Canada. But what I liked about it is not only was it a franchise that I recognized, and one of the gateway games other than Pokemon that got me into the genre, it was a little bit of a mashup between Pokemon and Magic, and sort of helped me understand the concepts in both of those games a little bit more. And actually, when I was putting it together, there was a little bit of an epiphany that I had, where it was like, okay, a lot of these new, people may or may not be aware that we are seeing a lot of new games come to Kickstarter and stuff like that aren't really reinventing the wheel with gameplay. They're Magic with some tweaks, or they're Pokemon with some tweaks or whatever. And I felt like I sort of realized that this game basically was that same sort of philosophy way back when, and I enjoyed it then because of the simplicity of it. It's got like a mana system, a resource system like Pokemon, where you attach cards to each character, but then it also has a battlefield like Magic the Gathering. And I think just somehow those things helped internalize those efforts for me. So it's such a weird one. I've interviewed the creator, and he said that he took a lot of inspiration from Pokemon, which was sort of just come out at the time, and obviously Magic as well, that he played in the early days. So I think it's an obscure pick, but it was one that definitely I had a lot of affection for way back when.
Of course, that post dates us by quite a bit. I don't know anything about Sailor Moon besides that it's a bunch of chicks running around. Maybe,
I don't know. He quickly agreed to how old we are. So.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up earlier. That you can just say old. You don't have to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna give it the bit of the spin, more experience.
Yeah.
Post dates is nice.
That's my number 5. So how about you, Richard? What's your what makes number 5 on your list?
My number 5 is Serpent's Tongue.
Yes, that was one from it was a Kickstarter game way back in like 2013 or something, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep, you mean you're good. How the hell did you know that?
I know a few games. Yeah.
Well, the one review he did of it, I think I actually wound up rubbing it on my nipples. So you should have known it would be on the top 5.
I love it. I told you this episode would be loose. As long as the shirt stays on.
Oh yeah, it was through the shirt. Nobody wants to see these things. I've got some over my shoulder. I'm not going to grab them, but they're huge, oversized cards. I haven't done gameplay. I don't need to. I mean, I love the looks of these things, and the sheer imagination and effort that went into it. The shtick is that they have a custom language that they actually had a linguist create for them. And you have to learn to read that if you want to successfully cast your spell. So it's a very, wizardy, D&D, nerdy kind of thing that I really think sounds awesome. We've agreed. I'm not sure we could play it seriously.
I don't know if we could keep a straight face and play it seriously.
Yeah. But yeah, man, it looks great. I love how original it is. I like what they were trying to do there at least. So yeah, I had to make the list for that reason.
But they had to go and make it in China, and that messed up everything because the insertion rate was they screwed that up terribly bad.
Yeah, distribution messed up.
Right. Did they end up having any expansions for it? I do remember there was a Kickstarter, and obviously I remember it had like a big codex, which must have been the translation for the book or something like that. But it's not something I've been able to personally touch. But did they have any follows up to it?
No follow-ups. They actually couldn't deliver on all the products that they committed to, so it didn't end well. I think they claimed to maybe try to reimburse people, but they had some stuff that was undelivered. They had some money troubles, and so yeah, it didn't end great. It died on the vine basically, but they did get product out.
Well, they got it. I think they ended up liquidating it through Amazon. Is what happened. I don't think most of it got delivered because that's where you've been picking it up, correct?
Yeah. They on one of the updates, one of the creators mentioned that they got stuck because they couldn't pay for it. It was. They were charging them more than they thought they were going to charge, and they couldn't get it released. But still, eventually, now products show up on Amazon. So
it got out there. It just somebody else got to benefit from it.
Well, it's definitely a good one to look back on at the moment in this 2022 era, where Kickstarter is such a huge part of the collectible card game conversation. So obviously, these things can be great, but obviously, there's the other side to it as well.
And I say there'll be a lot more other sides than the good sides in the long term. I mean, everything's great at the beginning,
I'm watching this with caution. I mean, I wish everybody luck, but there is a lot of first-time creators who aren't familiar with the way that these games have been made.
Yeah, and as we collectively know now, going back to the 90s, we know how all that ended. It ended with a whole bunch of crap in the bargain bins that nobody wanted.
It's good for us, though.
Yeah.
It keeps you guys going for sure. I love seeing the stuff you feature on your channel. Again, there'll be links in the description below to check out the show. Now, the thing about that, though, is the more and more people I interview about collectible games, especially those ones from the 90s that fell by the wayside, like, for example, my most recent episode about the Scooby-Doo, what I'm learning is it's not about poor gameplay, although that's the public perception, right? It's about poor business models. Like, it's about not being aware of how much to print, how to actually go in the marketplace. Because a lot of these things back then were either by RPG publishers who had no idea how to actually do the card side of things, or just passionate people who really wanted to do it. And the ones that endured were the ones who actually put that effort in, like your Legends of the Five Rings and all that sort of thing. So it's definitely a cautionary tale. So that's number 5, Serpent's Tongue.
And it really mirrors today's world where you have all these people on Kickstarter who have nothing behind them besides an idea, trying to get all these cards to market. Yeah, with the money you get up front, you can get that to market, but then what are you going to do? How are you going to propel that forward? How are you going to make your second set? How are you going to get that to distributors? How are you going to get the distributors to get that to the customers? How are you going to get people to buy that? So it's the same song. It's just on a different station this time around.
All right, well, let's cut it into number 4. So making our list at number 4, we will continue in the order that we've been going. So Harry, what's your number 4?
I'm going to go with WCW Nitro this time around. I'll do a little spoiler. It's the first of 2 sports games on my top 5 list. I come from more of a sports background. I grew up a lot. Baseball was one of my big things as a kid, and I had high hopes of being a Major League Baseball player until I was about 37. That's when I finally gave up the dream, and it wasn't going to happen. But yeah, I come from the sports card world. I was sports cards before I was into collectible card games and Magic and all of that. And of course, for me, it was just a natural continuation. It was a nice, seamless transition there. And, both of us have fond memories of sitting on my mom's couch watching WCW Nitro when we were late teenagers, late teenagers, 15, 16.
Old enough to know better.
Yeah, definitely old enough to know better. But we still enjoy wrestling. And it's got a few things going for it that I really enjoy. It's got a chase factor, and that most, if not all, the wrestlers are a little harder to get. They're a little harder insertion rates. They're sparkly. To me, that's nice. And then they have a first edition, which I appreciate on the collectibility and investment side. Is anytime there's a first edition, anything it tends to have a premium to it. And if you and the thing with Wizards of the Coast back then, I think they did this on Pokemon as well, is the first edition is so tiny and small in the box that a lot of people don't recognize it and see it. And so if you're paying attention in the eBay worlds, you can find those frequently underpriced because they don't mention it in the title or anywhere in the listing. So that's a bonus for me as well. And the biggest thing is they had a head of expansion called Hardcore that is probably one of the rarest card anything that I've ever seen. It hardly ever pops up anywhere. If you do, you'll see a pack here, a single pack here or there, and they're $25 to $50 a piece for one pack. I acquired a lot of bulk a few months ago, about 200 to 300 cards, and I paid less than $1 a piece for the cards, and that's the most I've ever seen at one time, and that was a private deal. We've seen one box sell, and it sold for $1,500, I believe.
Yeah.
And I think that was way too cheap. It should have been a $3,000 or $4,000 box.
Well, there's a couple of things that really drive those sort of games up. Obviously, like, you said you come from a sports card world, and obviously that sort of game features real world people. So it's not like Towers in Time where it's just random characters. It's real world people who still love this franchise, love this these wrestlers, and want to collect them so badly.
There's a lot of crossover. You get two different worlds minimum, you get sports people, wrestling people, collectible card game people. So
yeah, it's one of those ones that I think the sports card games are really undervalued because they do have that crossover. And essentially, for many people who aren't players or anything like that, are looking at them just like they would look at the regular sports card. So that's how you see those boxes go crazy. And just to speak to what you said before about the second set being so scarce, is as we were talking about before, a lot of these games came out and they overestimated how much they had to print because they had to print, 6-12 months in advance before release, put the orders in. And then when it came to those second sets, they throttled their orders way back just in the hopes to keep it in market, hoping that first set would sort of catch on while they had new product going and something new to talk about. And also, a lot of the times, those second sets are designed before the actual first set's released. So when you really start to see a drop-off, the second set is where you really see things scarce. My number 5 pick, Sailor Moon, is exactly the same. I was in Texas not so long ago, before COVID, but not so long ago, and they had booster packs there, individual booster packs for literally $40, $50 per pack, just because it was so underfounded. And obviously, again, like the wrestlers, that's an IP-driven games. That's the sort of thing where the collectors, regardless of whether they're players or not, love those characters and will pay through the nose for them.
Yeah, and the scarcity factor just adds to that value level. And I mean, I was astounded to even get what I got, and it wasn't a lot of. I mean, most of it was first edition. On top of being extremely rare, it's first edition, and it wasn't a lot of rares. It was mainly commons and uncommons. But to me, that's on a collecting side. That's what kind of drives me is more of the scarcity and there's obscure, which Richard is fond of. For me, it's scarcity combined with value, or at least perceived value from my side, and that drives me to want that.
Well, it's one of those things that it helps when card games are valuable like that. It helps us justify the way we're engaging with them, right? Like, things are just silly little Pokemon cards sitting in your closet from when you're a kid until Logan Paul cracks one open and pays, $300,000 for it or something like that.
They opens a box full of G.I. Joe cards.
Yeah, exactly. But not the trading card game, which, it would have been bad, but not as bad as just the free.
Yeah, that'd be a decent second place prize, but No, just the crappy trading cards. Man, nobody wants that.
Yeah, that even predate collectible card games. They're from like 1991 or something. Hilarious. Okay, so I think I'm next. So I'm gonna say my number 4, and I'm willing to bet it's probably the most recent released one on this list of all of us, but we'll see how we get down the line. So I'm talking about 2018's, produced by Wizards of the Coast, the Transformers trading card game.
Wow.
It is, again, another IP-driven one that I loved. It's designed by Drew Nalesko, who has a long history with Magic the Gathering and stuff like that. Ken Nagel, who was a famous Magic designer and stuff. And a lot of the Magic R&D team really lended their skill to it. So the game is really, really well designed. It's published by a major publisher, Wizards of the Coast, who actually gets a couple of mentions on this list. And it had a really innovative way of playing. Have either of you guys tried it out?
I swear we're so stuck in the 90s. I don't know we're ever going to get out. It's like a time hole. We have some stuff that's scattered outside of the 90s, but man, a lot of what we have is, and what we focused on is there.
Well, it's so interesting that you mentioned that, and this is actually part of why I wanted to have you guys on the show, because and one of the things I sort of consciously did is I chose only games that I would play because it was after that 90s era, and I thought that might be something you guys dive deep on. So as I was saying with the gameplay of Transformers, the thing I loved about it is it had this really unique way of like doing combat, like each card. And I believe, speaking of G.I. Joe, it was borrowed from the Wizards of the Coast G.I. Joe game from earlier on. You would flip cards from the top of your deck to signify how much damage or defense you did when you were attacking or defending. And it was a really interesting way because there was different colored traits, like orange pips would mean attack and blue pips would mean defense. So on defense, you'd want to flip blue, but not flip orange because orange didn't do anything. It was really innovative in the way that they did it. And it crafted this interesting resource system because there wasn't a traditional resource system, but it was like, okay, well, if I deck build with all these great cards, they might have less numbered pips so that when I flip cards, they're not going to do as much damage in game. And it's actually really interesting. I really loved the way that they did it. They also did something really unusual, which they did double-sized cards for the Transformers. So it did be a bit of a bane for collectors because it's like, what do you mean I got to buy these fucking giant sleeves? These giant sleeves for these Transformer cards, but they were double-faced like Magic's double-sided cards. And that means like the werewolves and stuff in the later Magic sets. And that really sort of encapsulated that transforming factor. I really did enjoy them. And the other thing I thought that was really brave for a WotC game is that they started doing things where it was a little bit outside the norm. So they had combiner cards where one of your Transformers could fold out and evolve into a giant combiner and connect together. It was really...
like a damn Transformer.
Yeah, like a damn Transformer. It was like, it really captured the IP really well. And I was really impressed with that. And the other thing, there was a couple of rules in it where it sort of said, we're not Magic. Like, obviously Magic has a couple of cards where you can get cards from outside the game and stuff like that. But Transformers had a couple of those as well, where it's like, oh, you'd never see this effect in Magic the Gathering. Like, go choose another commander from outside the game and put it in the game or something like that. And I really loved the way that shook out. So that is my number 4, the Transformers trading card game from Wizards of the Coast.
And before we move on, how long did that last?
So it had 5 sets, and actually it was a victim of COVID, supposedly. That's what they said. So it was canceled. It went from the end of 2018. It had, like I said, 5 sets until I believe it was early 2020. They released their last set in sort of the wake of COVID and then cut it off because at that stage, the printers like Carter Monday and stuff like that were cutting capacity because they didn't want workers too close to each other and something had to give and that was it. But it actually was interesting that Wizards marketed this game for, I think, something to hang in the toy aisle. And a lot of hobbyist gamers like ourselves really got into it because they, grew up loving Transformers, the TV show, and it was a really well-designed, thinky sort of game. So it sort of was aimed at like kids wanting to buy Transformers, but it was people like us who really got into it. It wasn't the gateway game they're expecting, and they wanted organized play and stuff like that. And Wizards of the Coast was not prepared to offer organized play. I think they had maybe one event at a Gen Con or something like that, and just wasn't ready for the reaction that the hardcore Transformer crossover with Magic players are. And it was actually really quite fun to watch. Yeah,
well, Transformers goes back almost 40 years, almost our lifetimes. I mean, that was early 80s when it was originally released. So when your fan base, if you release a game like that, especially since it's continued to be something in the forefront for generations now. So you have 40 years of potential fans out there. So I can understand how that would have blown up a lot bigger than they would have expected. And I'm also surprised at how often Wizards tries to come out with a new game. Every couple of years, they're like, let's try this out.
Yeah, who did you have on, Rands, that said they suspect that WotC does that just to feed Magic?
Yeah, so they do that as, like we were saying, like a gateway game. And another one of those will be on my list later on, again, spoiler, where they are trying to get a mass appeal audience and try and get them into the hobby store mentality. I can't remember who said it. It was, I think, Jason Robinette, maybe, back in episode 3. He's very, very clued into that world. And I think that is definitely something they try and do. If you look at the other games that they've done, probably post 2000, they've not been gamer based; they've been IP based. So they've really been pushing, especially Hasbro franchises. And again, I don't want to spoil anything, but another couple will come up on my list. So it's very interesting.
That is genius marketing. I'll give them credit for that.
I mean, they have a brand to build, right? And now that they've figured out how to get. And I feel like I mentioned this every second episode, but now with the Universes Beyond thing, where they can just say, "Hey, this Magic card is now." Han Solo or something.
Yeah, the whole secret layer thing is that's going to in my opinion, that's going to revolutionize the collectible card game world. And I don't know that we've even touched the tip of that iceberg yet.
No, this is going to be.
I'm saying if you start the print to demand and direct print, where you just print the cards and you send them to somebody, you're cutting out the entire middleman there. And before long, you start to question, why do you need a middleman? And then all of a sudden you're just, do we even need to sell packs or boxes anymore? We can just print the cards out and send them to them directly. And I don't want to get too deep into that. We've got a video kind of touching on that a little bit, and we'll probably talk about that later. But to me, it's a slippery slope.
It is, and the audience does not like it. There's a little. We'll just touch on this a little bit. There was a game company called Precedence Entertainment. They did the Rifts CCG way back in the early 2000s, and they started selling singles on their own website in the early days of the internet. Game store owners were livid and absolutely disgusted that you could go onto these websites and they were selling surplus individual single cards on their own website. It did not end well, and within 24 hours, and this is like before the internet is as reactive as it is now, they had pulled that from their website and everything. It was, and we don't have to get into it. Hopefully we'll have somebody who was involved in it on at some point to talk about it, but that is something that really shook up the industry at the time, back in 2002, I think it was.
Well, if you can print to demand, then where's the scarcity come from? That's the driver of the entire CCG market when you get down to it. Is you have to have some level of scarcity and some level of value. Otherwise, what's the point?
These are all topics for episodes that could be hours and hours and hours long.
We could drop out on that for a long time.
I think this decade will be the most interesting decade in the collectible game space, with NFTs coming up and games integrating those with things like we've talked about with Secret Lair and Universes Beyond, where they've got an entire Lord of the Rings set. Does that mean that a Lord of the Rings collectible card game in itself doesn't need to exist? Like when the next Star Wars franchise trilogy comes out, is it just going to be straight a Magic set? Like we've had a collectible card game with every Star Wars trilogy so far. What's going to happen next time? It just becomes a Magic thing because Hasbro owns the toy rights to whatever.
It's a deep hole.
Oh man, and we like deep holes, but we won't adventure them down them today. All right, now Richard, number 4. What do you got?
A Magica. I assume you know this one.
Oh yes, of course. Yes, of course. Yeah, that is a wild game. Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those that the art alone, I think, would put it on the list. Mechanics are very interesting as well, but I mean the way that the level of detail at which they integrated the novel with the cards, down to characters that if you're not, they might appear for a page or two and they're going to be on a card.
Well, it's so fascinating. They sort of mix that, and the book itself is incredibly surreal. It mixes surreal, not only paintings, but photography with those cards and stuff like that. And I mean, it might only be the only collectible card game card that features an anus shooting fire.
That's why it's on my list.
If only they had somebody rubbing a card on their nipples on one of them.
That's in the next set.
Do you want to give a quick overview of the gameplay? I believe you play as some sort of like cosmic force, like between dimensions or something.
Yeah, you're basically an evil dictator, and you're trying to take over a certain number of locations. So the actual, I mean, conceptually, it doesn't sound terribly unique, but But the way in which it works, it does, and the way they use areas and phases in the game, to where you go out and you try to capture a certain number, and then they can be squabbled for and taken back, and so it's sort of a take over the world. I want to control more than you do, sort of thing.
Yeah, it reminds me of the sort of like a cousin to, say, something like Cult, which was a RPG originally, but it was like a really aggressive, wild-looking collectible card game that I really have a lot of passion for. So if you like those things like Cult and stuff like that, you've got to check out. And it's Clive Barker as well, so there's definitely going to be that angle of difference there.
Yeah, and the other cool thing about Magica is it was HarperCollins that printed that, and that was their first card game, and then they are the only ones that we know of, according to the Scribe Bible, that paid royalties to Wizards of the Coast for the intellectual property rights of
trading card
games.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, again, another one of those holes that you can just dig down deeply. I believe a lot did. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh did. They paid that royalty and stuff like that.
Did they?
Now, for those who don't know, there'll be a picture of it on the screen, but we're talking about the Scry Guide to Collectors, which is actually down here somewhere.
We got one right here, Andy.
Hey, there it is. That is definitely a daily thing reference for me. I love it. I wish maybe somebody will hopefully do an updated volume or something like that picks up where that one left off, because it's been so useful for me, somebody who basically started playing when more or less Pokemon came out. There's some other things in there as well, but that basically picks up with Pokemon coming out more or less. And that sort of gave me such a foundation back in the day about how those early collectible card games went.
Yeah, the thing that always shocks me about the Scribe Bible, and we always call it that, it's what we refer it as too, is that I can't remember if it was the first edition or second edition that it did not recommend you to grade your Pokemon cards. They said that they're all going to grade 10s. Don't even worry about it. It's not worth the time. It's not worth the effort or the money to grade those Pokemon cards. Just throw them back in the closet and forget about them. And if you had taken that advice, you'd be missing out on six-figure Charizard cards now. So
absolutely. Well, I don't want to spoil too much, but we might have one of the names in that front cover on the show very soon.
Oh yeah,
nice.
All right, so number 3, what do we got today? Let's mix it up. Let's start with where we left off. All right, Richard, what do you got for number 3 this time?
Oh, well, now we're duplicating. WCW Nitro. That's my number 3.
You guys used to play, did you guys say, together, or was something you only got into more recently?
The card game was recently.
Yeah, card game was recent. Yeah, the nostalgia was together. When we used to watch the show and eat cheese dip and Walmart chicken strip.
And not gain a pound. I'm starting to move out of those days.
Oh, yeah, we didn't gain a pound. Ooh. What are you talking about?
This is all in the past week or two.
Yeah. I think it was I've heard other people talk trash about life decking, but I actually have no issues with it at all. I really like the mechanic, especially when you do something creative with the peeling off the cards and what happens when you discard for life. I like that it's simplistic. I like that the rules can fit almost entirely on the playmat. I think it's perfect. It's a perfect game.
Yeah, Wizard. I think it was Wizards' sweet spot. They figured out Magic. Pokemon was in their rear view because I think they hadn't lost the rights. I think they did 1 or 2 sets of Pokemon. I don't remember now, but they gotten through that, and it was successful. And it just happened that WCW was on its way out to merge with WWF at the time before they became WWE.
Yeah.
So they caught it at the wrong time, but I think it was a great game. And we found out recently that Raw Deal was actually based almost entirely off of that game.
Well, that was from
this
show.
Yeah, exactly. So I had an episode with the designer of the Nitro game, which is Mike Fitzgerald. You can find it on the channel, and he sort of goes into what happened with that and how there might have been some, less than honorable business practices when it comes to the way that the mechanics were. Apparently, just the Crib Notes version is that he pitched the Nitro game to WWF at the time, and they essentially ran with the rule set and sort of modified it a little bit, and there was a lawsuit and everything. Check out my other episode for more details on that, but it's a fascinating case.
Yeah, that'll be a part of my drive time here in the next week or so.
Oh, awesome. All right, so I'll stay sandwiched in the middle between you guys. So my number 3 is again a Wizards of the Coast game. It is actually Wizards of the Coast gets a couple of shout outs on this list, yet I wouldn't call them one of my favorite publishers. Wizards of the Coast's Star Wars trading card game. Now, it gets on my list. A lot of people obviously still love the collectible card game from Decipher, the Star Wars one, the one that started basically, every single Star Wars card game, like we mentioned earlier. There's been a few. But the thing I liked about this one is, first of all, it came along with my generation, so I was there to play it. But it did a couple of things that were really interesting, I felt, with gameplay. Essentially, what it did is it's designed by Richard Garfield. So obviously, that a lot of thought went into it. And a lot of Magic's sort of most iconic designers and developers worked on the game as well at the time. They just started hiring off the Pro Tour, and it was a really tight game as far as that sort of stuff goes. What was fascinating about it, though, is Richard set out to find that Star Wars was more of like it was wars. It was like an old-timey war game where you'd have miniatures and stuff like that. So he decided to try and make a miniature style game, but in a card form. So that meant there was a lot of dice rolling, like you see in things like the Warhammer miniatures game and stuff like that. And it also had different areas of control, and the goal was to control 2 or more areas, which doesn't really feel like something Star Wars when you think about it, but it is. Every battle in Star Wars is either a battle between people, like, whether it's Obi-Wan versus Darth Vader, it's a battle between a dogfight in space, which is, like destroying the Death Star, or it's a battle on land, which is like, the AT-ATs on Hoth or whatever. It really captured that feel so good, and it really felt like the resource system that Richard built into the game, which was sort of like, unlike Magic, where you've got to have that many resources at the time, you can sort of, almost like people have played old-time strategy games and stuff like that, like real-time strategy games, you can sort of build cards over multiple turns. So like if you had 1 mana left over to use Magic Ease, if you had 1 mana left over, you could put it on a card to use next turn and stuff like that. It was a really cool game, and it also did something that Decipher had trouble with, whereas in Decipher, all the greatest characters were rare, basically. Like, if you wanted to play Darth Vader, you had to get the rare one. You had to spend. It was a real pay to sort of play model with Decipher in most cases. But with the WotC game, they had variants of the different characters, which they also do in the Decipher game, but again, they're rare. But they had a common version in each set, an uncommon version of each set, and a rare version of the main characters. So, and they could sort of almost like Pokemon cards evolve from one another. So, like a Pikachu evolves into a Raichu or whatever, a basic Luke Skywalker common could essentially evolve into the uncommon and evolve into the rare, which would cost you less in the game. So it was a really cool way to capture the Star Wars feel. And it was really nice sort of first taste of pushing the boundaries of what a collectible card game was, because it wasn't just like all board state. There was a lot of dice rolls. It was, which, some people thought was a little bit too random, but, it was an era when organized play was the focus of Wizards of the Coast. So they didn't really support it for too long, but it lasted 10 sets. All the 6 main movies got a set each, and as well as some other really fun stuff. Did you guys have any experience with the game?
To be honest, I don't even know Wizards had made a Star Wars game. I'm not surprised, and I'm not surprised that Wizards turned it into a good game. Again, as we talked about, once we get past Magic being solidified, they knew what they were doing, so they had all the tools to make good games. It's just a matter, get more into conspiratorial stuff. Are they making these games to last? Or are they making these games to induce people to buy more later? So after what we've talked about here, maybe it's more of the latter. They're just trying to get people to buy into the hobby side of it, to get them to Magic later, because they know Magic will go forever.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see Magic evolve into this sort of like IP catch-all that some other games have done really well. There's a Japanese game that's really popular that uses different anime franchises every set, Wei Schwartz, where you can have a different, when 1 week it's Card Captors and the next week it's Mob Psycho 100 or whatever it's called. It's different things, and that's what I see Magic becoming, that, finally evolving into this final form of this IP catching thing.
Yeah, to your point, I agree that White Schwartz is also maybe they're even pushing Magic to go that way as well, because the Japanese market has gotten so big, the anime market has gotten so big, the manga market has gotten so big that you're getting all this crossover between anime and card games now, and one company that can just you give us the IP and we'll print up cards and we'll go.
Like I said, I think this next decade is going to be the most interesting since the 90s. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna jump into number 3 for you then, Harry. What do you got for number 3?
All right, so this is one of two that is pretty much only on aesthetics that I picked these. We haven't dove too deep into these, but they struck me so hard that on the art alone, I'm going to recommend them and include them in my top 5. So number 3 for me is Hecatomb. So we're back to Wizards of the Coast again. We keep bashing Wizards of the Coast, and we keep put Wizards of the Coast on our list. So they do things correctly in many cases.
Yeah.
The art is extremely dark, and it's something I really appreciate in a card game, especially when you're going to call it Hecatomb. And it could have been so much better, but just as is, it's some of the best artwork I've seen on a card. Though if we could debate, we can have a whole other video if we could even call this a card, just because of the pentagon shape that these cards are in.
Yeah, so I mean, for those who don't know, they're not traditional cards. They were sold in booster packs, but they are a 5-sided, not hexagon, pentagon, yeah, which is very appropriate for the theme, and it's very dark art for Wizards of the Coast, almost like that sort of cult game we spoke of before, where it's all monsters and very, very dark. They even had a set called, I think, Last Hallows Eve or something like that, where it's specifically Halloween.
I think it really had something going for it outside of the fact that it was 5-sided pentagon, nearly the size of your hand. I mean, they're big, and they're made of really thin plastic that time does not do well with. We've got a box opening. We opened the whole box, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a box opening on the channel that we even chipped one. Just opening a pack, it just chips. Not to mention they stick together and everything like that. But it's got all the flaws you wouldn't want in a card game. But the artwork for me saves it, just because of. I really like the dark stuff, and there's not card games out there that go that deep and are that bold. And from Wizards, even at that time, I mean, that's on the heels of Pokemon. That's pretty incredible, in my opinion, that they would even venture into that realm. Maybe that's why they went for the plastic and the pentagons, and so they wouldn't be associated with Magic and Pokemon, and they could distance themselves from that. I don't know, just a guess. I've contended, and I've mentioned this in our videos that we talk about this, that if it had been a standard cardboard, standard size, all that, I think it would have done very well. And even if it had died, I think the valuation would be much higher today than it is. Because right now you get that stuff dirt cheap.
It's Wizards again. We spoke about it earlier, but like changing that conventional poker card size, like with the Transformers game I mentioned earlier, is crippling to a traditional CCG collector. So it was sort of going after a different market. And it's one of those games that I heard didn't do great in market, but on top of it, it might have lasted longer if it was made of cardboard, like you mentioned. The thing about it, the reason it's made of plastic is because you can stack those shapes on top of each other, and it will give you a consistent power level. Like you'll be able to see through the cards, sort of like the game Gloom, or Redakai did this later on, but with more traditional card shapes. The thing that killed it the most, apparently, wasn't necessarily the fact that it was doing poorly in sales. It was sort of average for Wizards of the Coast. But from what I've heard, it was because plastic is so much more expensive to produce and print on than, say, cardboard was. So it wasn't something that they were interested in doing en masse as the sales started to dwindle.
That's one of the things that we've read about that as well, that, the oil prices at the time, I think the last set was 04, 05, 06, somewhere in that range. And, oil prices have really shot up at that point. And it was an instant killer for a game that's not Magic the Gathering. We debated on our channel that we could probably make this game work in a 4-sided way, if forced to. And we've actually begged. I don't know if that video is quite live yet. It may be before this goes live. I'm not sure. I remember now. Our schedule is a little messed up, but We said we'd buy the rights for $5 and turn it into a new game.
That's a fantastic deal if you can get it. I'll chip in too just to get 40% ownership.
All right, so we can throw $10 at it.
Yeah, $10.
We just doubled the valuation. I love it. Awesome. So that's Hecatomb. That's great. Like I said, it really stretches the boundaries of what a collectible card game can be, because obviously we think cardboard, but it really does stretch that boundary. So without further ado, let's move on to our number 2s. All right, so we'll do the same pace that we did before, and let's start with Richard this time. Richard, number 2, what do you got for us?
Ophidian 2350.
Oh, great choice.
I knew you would approve. By the way, your honorary glass, I drank it for you. I'm sorry, but
that's right. I'm glad it's going to a good home.
Yeah. This one is more about the I feel like the mechanics were advanced for when it was. It was a little bit ahead of their time. There's a lot of flexibility. I think there was a lot of potential there. And I think it's one of those ones like you alluded to that it wasn't bad game. That's not what happened. There was other stuff going on there. Fleer is what was going on there. It's one of your interviews actually. But yeah, that surely makes it on the potential, I think, of the mechanics alone for me. I think that really could have been great.
Well, I mean, for those who don't know, Ophidian, I mean, it's a really cool game. It's like a gladiator, Mad Max gladiator fight. That's you're trying to impress audiences and all that sort of stuff. It's a great theme. Do you want to give us a bit of an overview of how it plays?
So you have your Rands, you got your 3 gladiators, right? Your 3. You bring your 3 into play, and then you've got. Oh shit! I'll lose my train of thought. You can probably explain this better than me because I'm actually losing my ability to do that.
Well, after you start drinking my drink, maybe that's why. So from my understanding, it's sort of actually a little bit similar to the way we looked at the Transformers game, where you start with a set of team that also has a reserve member as well, and you fight back and forth in a very sort of magic sort of way, but your resource system again is like accolades from the crowd, and the way that you actually do better things is impress the crowd, and you can fight your opponent, or you can do like things for style points, like cut their neck, or put on an advanced arm and like robo stretch them out there. It's a really cool concept that I really do enjoy. By previous guest on the show, Jason Robinette, that you can look up, of course. He worked with Fleer and a young design team of like 20 somethings who put the game together initially. It's a really fascinating game. But at the same time, Fleer was starting to get out of the collectible card game business. They thought that they had they thought that they would give it another run after the Star Trek game that they released in the 90s and a couple other games. And it's another one that did not suffer because of poor sales, like you said. It's one of those ones, or even poor gameplay or design or whatever. It wasn't broken or anything like that, but it was one of those ones that it was just the company had decided to do other things at the time and shut down that division. Now, the thing about it though is it does endure to today, because there is a new version called, I don't remember, but again, it'll be linked in the description. There's a new version of it coming that's a living card or an expandable card game.
2360 was a fixed deck. There's another one after that, and I remember that he mentioned that on your podcast, and I lost it too. So
yeah, I will link it. It's like not ARENAVERSE, it's something like that. It's ARENAVERSE.
There you go, you got it.
So that's number 3, Ophidian. Any last words on Ophidian?
It's cheap.
Yeah, it's cheap. I mean, if you're going to look for something that has potential, that could be fun, and is affordable, yeah, I think this should be number 1 on that list for that reason. Yeah,
it's one of those games that is still available. A company, Hack Games, who are releasing the ARENAVERSE version, bought up the old stock from a bunch of old distributors and still sell it. So you can find it on eBay for you can get booster packs and starter sets and stuff. I don't know, like $30 or something like that, and get like a decent thing to get going and start playing. And again, even if you learn the rules for that, you'll be ready for the updated version, which is ARENAVERSE as well. All right, so I am going to take on number 2. So number 2 is a really special one for me. It's one that really got me to better understand the nature of competitive collectible card games. And it is by Upper Deck in the early 2000s, featuring some of our favorite web slingers and comic book characters. It is Verse System. So Verse System was a game where we sort of could have Marvel and DC characters clash. It was sort of based a little bit on Magic. It had a lot of professional Magic players designing it. Like the designers included people like Matt Hydra, who was a semi-pro Magic player at the time, Danny Mandel, Mike Hummel, and Your Move Games, which was a very famous Magic team, did design consulting on it for a long time. And we've even had Justin Gary, who was part of that team, on the show before to talk about it. But it was one that really, really revolutionized the way I looked at competitive play. Like I'd played Pokemon competitively for, whatever that means as a teenager or young teenager. But it offered a ton of money and stuff like that for like a pro tour or pro circuit, as they called it. And I got involved in that at a really young age. And it was something that I really loved. It taught me about, like things like card advantage and min-maxing my decks and stuff like that. I still sucked, but it was cool to do it with like characters like Green Lantern and mix it with characters like, the X-Men and stuff like that. As a teenager who loved comic books, it was one of my favorite things. It really mixed the IPs well. And one of my favorite things about collectible card games is the tribal nature of collectible card games. If you play Magic or something like that, I love putting all sorts of wizards and stuff together in a deck. And that game really lent into the tribal nature of it because it was all about whose team you were on. Were you an X-Men or were you an Avenger? Were you a member of the Justice League or the Injustice League or the, or the Green Lanterns or whatever? We really captured that feel. And that's what I loved about the game. And the other thing it really does, and this is going to come up with my last number one pick as well, so very astute people start guessing, any card becomes a land card like in Magic. Any card can get turned face down, plopped in front of you. You just be like, all right, I don't want this in my hand, and it becomes like one of your mana or one of your resource cards. And it was the second or first, it was around about one of the first games I played where that was a concept, where you didn't have to worry about filling your deck with 50% land or 50% energy cards like in Pokemon or something like that. It really was like, oh great, every card in my deck is going to be useful and playable and have some effect in the situation. Now, again, in the competitive play side of things, it made your head just crumble under the weight of it, but it was a really cool design. Have you guys have any experience with that game? It featured, like I said, Marvel, DC, and even Hellboy at one stage.
It's one of those we haven't come across either in things we're trying to acquire or just by random chance. And a lot of stuff we do own because of random chance, and it's never popped up. And things that we're looking for tend to cost a lot of money, so we tend to be poor on that side, and we just don't dedicate money to things that we haven't got into yet.
Well, this goes back to what we were saying with the wrestling and the Sailor Moon and stuff like that. The comic book characters, more than ever nowadays, have such a big fan base. So there's not just players, but like collectors of this sort of artifacts after those cards. So boxes are crazy more expensive than they've ever been before.
And that's another barrier to the or challenge to the what trying to get that is because it's expensive. We always hope that we can come across this stuff naturally and just by chance in the world.
That's awesome. So that's Verse System. So okay, number 2 for you then, Harry. What do you got?
So this is the second of the more aesthetic appeal for me is Dark Age, and it's back again to the Hecatomb side of the dark, gritty, Gerald Brom, just dark. Ready to eat you kind of deal, Mad Max style artwork that the first time I saw it, it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen. And as we discussed earlier, I don't know if the video was live or not, but when Rudy on Alpha Investments opened that box, a lot of comments in the video were how great the artwork was, and even Rudy commented on how great the artwork was, and that's what really grasped me when I first saw that. We've looked a little bit at gameplay. I'm not even really concerned by the gameplay, to be honest. I think it'll be okay. I think it'll be okay enough for what the cards are, because you're just not going to see art like that anymore. Hell, they should be framed and put on a wall.
And Dark Age is a great game. I played it a couple of times. It's actually personally one of my favorites, and I've had to downsize since moving around the world a lot, but it is one of the games that I still have sealed product of, and I love it so much because it is so inventive. I love it. It's sort of got like a Mad Max aesthetic to it. And there was 2 other sets planned. Like the one that got released was Dark Age Feudal Lords. There was the Brood, which would be more like the cards you were talking about, like the Hecatomb cards, where it was going to be like very dark sort of art, very like grotesque, sort of like almost like the Clive Barker stuff we were talking about earlier. And then a third one as well that I'm not sure. I think they did announce the name of what that would be, but something a little bit more, I think, traditional fantasy. But it's such a great looking game. And I'm sure ever since that video went up on Alpha Investments, sealed product is going to be very hard to come by. But it's such a gorgeous game. And I think even if you haven't experienced the gameplay, or you're not too familiar with the gameplay, I can stand behind that. I like the way that game plays.
Of everything we opened so far, and we've opened a lot of games, by far it's the best looking I've seen, hands down.
Absolutely. Like everything is so almost photorealistic. And not just Brom, but the other people that he worked with and brought in on the game. It looks, it looks so living and so breathing. Even though the cards focus on like a single piece of art, there's no like background and stuff for most of the cards, if any of the cards, I don't think. It just feels like every piece is part of like this giant world building puzzle. Again, another one that would look fabulous in a binder.
Yeah, or on a wall in a frame.
All right. So does that bring us to the end of number 2?
That's it.
I think so.
This is the big one now. We got number 1 ready to go. All right. So number 1, I'm going to go last this time, but I want you guys to go first. So let's start. Okay, so let's start where we left off this time. Number 1, what have you got for us, Harry?
All right. Well, I mentioned earlier there's going to be 2 sports games in this top 5. So we've only seen one.
And you're a big baseball fan.
I'm a baseball fan, so I'm choosing hockey.
Wild. What hockey game is that?
My number 1 choice is playoff hockey one-on-one challenge.
Wow.
And we're not Canadian, and I'm not a hockey fan. It's to me, it's got, this game's got everything I want going for it. It's got scarcity. It's got extremely good gameplay. It's got unique capabilities. It's got what do I want to say about it? It fits. It's a double crossover of sports and collectible card games. It was unique in its time and how the gameplay progressed.
Well, tell us a little bit about it. I've only seen it around. I know that it can be very hard to come by sometimes, especially the second set. Tell us about how did it encapsulate hockey in gameplay?
So it plays a lot like an actual, what you would think of as a non-hockey player, hockey would play like. You have a puck that you put in the center, and you have a face-off, and you roll dice, and it's based on your stats of your players that are facing off. And control goes to whoever rolls highest, and they control the puck, and then you can pass and you can shoot, and you can skate your players forward, and then you kind of have your secondary zone, and once you have your players in the zone, then they get bonuses for when they shoot, and everything. Your entire card deck, like you mentioned earlier, everything can be played as a resource. So you can discard a card to skate your player forward. You don't have to use the card as it's stated. You can just dump it and be done with it, and use it as a maneuver. Or each card has a play on it that is specific to what the card states, that you can skate or shoot or whatever the case might be. And as the rarity level increases, the more powerful they become. And goes from common to uncommon, rare, and ultra rare. And the rares are extremely powerful. Many of them have where you score instantly with no challenge. Is a big boon in the game, because a lot of your goalies, especially your top end goalies, are very powerful goalies and can defend very, very well. So to score instantly is, it's a big game changer. And on top of that, that's, to me, that's a great way to do a sports game. It's very true, in my very United States of America opinion, to hockey. Poor Canadians might not agree with that, but so on the gameplay side, I think it's fantastic. And to me, the biggest thing for collectibility is they have this ultra rare category. That when they say ultra rare, they really, really mean that. They had 20 ultra rares for starters and 20 ultra rares for boosters. So they were inserted. Boosters is 1 in 72 packs, or 1 per 3 boxes or 2
1
boxes?
and 2 boxes.
1 and 2 boxes on
boosters,
and 1 and
1 and
4
1 and 4 on starters. Yeah.
1 and 4 on starters. So it's 8 starters per starter brick. So 1 out of every 32 starter packs you open, you got an ultra rare. And so when they say ultra rare, they really, really meant that. Now they did listen to those odds in the expansion, and the expansion, ironically, is very, very, if not very, very hard, if not impossible to find on the sealed side. We have found 1 pack ever, seen ever,
period. Anything sealed, yeah.
But I have almost a complete set of the ultra rare expansions. So I don't know how that distribution worked. I don't know where all the expansion came from. I don't know if it was all cracked. I don't know. But the ultra rares on the expansion side, they're seeded more generously, but they're also more readily available too. Which you would think that they'd be about equal to what the base set would be. And the base set is much, much harder to come by, and especially the ones that came in the starter decks. And that's one of my personal challenges, is to get an entire complete set of all the ultra rares.
That's awesome. I do have a quick question. It is unlike Fast Break or Gridiron from one of its contemporary sports games, that it features real players, right? Like, and photo cards.
Yeah. So they did have license at the time. Playoff was mainly known, I think, for football in the 90s. They did dabble in hockey, and I don't know that they really had anything going in baseball or basketball. But yeah, it was fully licensed and has all players and all the stars from that era: Wayne Gretzky, Marlo Lemieux, Patrick Roy. Yeah, if you watch Sports Center in the 90s, all those guys were on there. So,
well, it really amazes me that this game is the way it is. Now, I only know about it a little bit tangentially, but from what I understand, you said you didn't understand how you could find singles, but you couldn't find sealed stuff. And I think that game, initially, the first set did go into hobby and mass market distribution, but the second set, which was like the 96 to 97 roster of players, I should say, was only directly sent to mass market. So it sort of borrowed from that sports card side, and from the rarity you said as well, it sounded like it was leaning a lot, even though it had this fantastic gameplay, which I think is actually something that's missing in this Kickstarter era. Where's the sports game? Anyway, I think it's one of those things that it's fascinating as an icon of collectible game history, because it did I think even the Scry guides, the first one doesn't even have it, because Scry wasn't even aware a second set got released. Like the second set was only, again, in mass market, that only got discovered because players would talk about it. It didn't even go through hobby. So it is a really fascinating, corner case, and I would love to try and play it one day.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic game. And again, on the seal stuff, it's something we've discussed. We kind of figured the expansion ended up in the Walmarts and the Targets of the world versus, hobby market, because we just can't find that sealed product. And I don't understand. You would think that there would be somewhere out there just languishing in, somebody's basement, warehouses, or somewhere. Because I find it hard to believe that it was, but maybe Canada saved us all. Maybe they opened all of it and kept it into the market. Otherwise, it would have probably been destroyed.
It fascinates me, and it is 100% something I want to give a go. It's probably beating a border officer at a game of one-on-one hockey collectible card game is probably going to be on my Canadian citizenship test one day, so I should probably give it a go. It's definitely something that I would love to get back to. So we will move on to the next one. Now, Richard, tell me, what have you got for number one, your number one game?
Number one for me is Guardians.
Tell me why you love Guardians.
That is one for me that art alone, that's a trading card that, I can collect and put on the wall. Absolutely love the artwork. I love the thing they did. And I think they were the first to do it. All the art coming out of the frame, out of the box on the card. It's just fantastic. So regardless of gameplay at all, any other considerations, beautiful game. And they really did a good job of merging that. They have goofy art. They've got, what's the guy's name? Plug. Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Yep, Plug.
And then Braum. I mean, how far apart can you be in the artwork world? But they somehow made all of that fit together in just a beautiful.
Yeah, it felt like it was like a whole, like, obviously, I think people would most be familiar with it with what Magic brought out in the 90s, and they still do nowadays, is the unsets, these silly sort of sets that have some serious elements, and then like these frame-breaking weirdness. And there is Santa Claus is delivering beer in one of the cards. Like, it's a crazy, and literally they have Alfred E. Newman, like the guy from Mad Magazine, depicted on a card as a zombie. Like, it's such a cool game, and it is basically, when people ask me about it, the Mad Magazine of collectible card games, because you've got to check it out. Even if you're not interested in the gameplay, which is challenging at times, it is a fantastic looking game. And we mentioned it before, we were talking about Dark Age. That company, FPG, with Luke Peterschmidt and Keith Parkinson at the helm, did the best looking collectible card games of the 1990s. So yeah, go on. Tell me more about what you like about Guardians. Like, what about the gameplay?
Yeah, gameplay has a lot of potential, and I'm not sure they had the expansions are so difficult to get and expensive. I don't know how much they actually got to refine gameplay. But you actually got spatial existence matters. So you're on a board and you're moving around and you're trying to take over your opponent's area, and then you're fighting basically their avatar, which is their guardian. And there's a lot of potential there. I think they could have really refined that if they'd had some more sets and worked on that. I'm not sure if they ever got to that point where the mechanics were really lined out and balanced. But like Magic, they had a shell of mechanical infrastructure that had a lot of potential.
Yeah, it was an unfortunate one. They did have to declare bankruptcy again, because these were on that side that felt the passionate people who just could not estimate how much the market wanted. They were over ordering, they were getting in debt. And then obviously things like Magic and stuff were coming out at the time. It came out in the sort of, what people call the glut of 1995. And sort of, despite the fact it stood out from art, and we're still talking about it today because of that art. Like, if you look back at any collectible card game, I've got the guide here next to me. It looks fantastic. And unfortunately, it did fall by the wayside, but it could have become it could have become another major player in the scene. I wish it did.
Yep, absolutely.
It is a fantastic game. Hopefully we'll get somebody on to talk about that game at some point in the near future. So I guess that leaves one more number one, and that's from me. And it couldn't be more different from hockey or Mad Magazine Ash trading cards. Again, I am going back to that Wizards of the Coast. And I'm going to say that their number one game that is dead, but not really. Like, this is a bit of a cheat, because it's not actually dead in other languages, but it is dead in English. That is the Duel Masters trading card game. Now, this is a game, if you don't know, that Wizards of the Coast still publishes today. They only publish in Japan. They did try and revive it a couple of years ago with a game called Kaijudo, different card backs and stuff like that, but they launched this way back originally in Japan in 2002, and then in 2004 here in English. And unfortunately, the English market had just been saturated with things like Yu-Gi-Oh! And a ton of other Japanese properties that had hit. So it was sort of met with a shrug. But the gameplay, designed by Mike Elliott, the same designer who designed Hecatomb and stuff we talked about before, and worked on, again, by the Magic R&D team, some of which who still work on the game today for its Japanese releases, it encapsulated a lot of things that I think collectible card games needed to learn from. And for me, it was really a sort of huge, Richard said before he likes the obscure stuff. For me, a generation of people who were growing up on things like Yu-Gi-Oh!, like Pokemon, it sort of filled that obscure niche for me. It sort of was silly as well, like we were talking about with Guardians, and it did some really interesting mechanical things. Obviously, like one-on-one hockey, it did any card as resource, like Verse system, any card as resource. It also did something that I think is essential for any new trading card game that's coming out, and that's a catch-up mechanic. As you start to fall behind in the game, like, you start to get a slight advantage, which in Pokemon, they have this thing called prize cards, where you can sort of, every time you defeat a monster of your opponents or a Pokemon of your opponents, you get to take one of your prizes. So that means people who are winning start to snowball their victory and get more going. Whereas actually in Duel Masters, and I believe this is a mechanic that dates way back to 1995 in the game called Towers in Time, they had this thing called shields, where shields, every time you defeated one, you could do any amount of damage to a shield and it would break, and then you would get the card that you placed there at the beginning of the game into your hand. So as you're losing the game, you're getting card advantage in a way. And Mike Elliott reappropriated this mechanic from this game, this obscure game that is way back in the 90s to Duel Masters. And I think, and it still endures today because it's such a vibrant way to do a collectible card game. And some of the new games that I'm seeing on Kickstarter nowadays are actually borrowing this mechanic. And obviously it's something that I think is really, really valuable. The other thing I loved about it as well, and again, this talks to what we were talking about with Magic the Gathering, or Wizards of the Coast rather, seeding their population with seeding the population with Magic-esque games. This one, it was very Magic-esque. You would play any card as a resource, and it had 5 color systems where basically it's the same as Magic, except for purple instead of black, and white was yellow instead. And they were called civilizations, and it basically would train kids how to learn magic. It used some of the same keywords as Magic. It used a lot of the same sort of reminder text formatting. Essentially, it would make kids grow up into becoming Magic players ideally. And I'm sure in places like Japan, where it's still getting published, it has done that just great. Like whenever somebody gets college age or whatever, it's like, right, I'm going to put down my crazy Japanese monsters and move into the Magic side of things. It's actually a really fantastic game. I mean, the one thing I do hate about it is it does that thing that I absolutely hate that Yu-Gi-Oh! And a lot of anime games do, where the attack power isn't 1 or 2, it's 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 for no apparent reason. There's the zeros at the end of the numbers.
So I've never understood that. Why is it so big?
Yeah, it's supposed to be cool and impactful. That's the one thing that bothers me about it, but it is my #1 dead trading card game in English. For those who are going to comment on this video or on the podcast. In English, it is a dead trading card game. And I think it was very vibrant. Again, the Magic team worked on it. It added new mechanics and new keywords every single set like Magic does. So you did get a full Magic experience, but in this more like Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh! Sort of style. So that's my #1. Do you guys have any experience with the game?
No.
No, not play experience.
That tends to be our differences in our list is you have a lot of games that we don't really have experience with yet. And at least for me, I want to get to every game eventually. Whether that actually happens or not, that's a whole different story or not.
It's a hard quest. I'm trying.
Yeah, it's just kind of what's falling in our lap more than anything. And then things that we really enjoy that we come across, we pursue those, maybe to the detriment of getting newer stuff or other stuff that we could. Maybe we're pigeonholing ourselves a little bit in that regard. And we do have some stuff that is weird. We just, I don't know. We're kind of, maybe we're just drawn to the 90s because we're nostalgic and old. I don't know.
Experience.
Yeah. See all that gray there? Yeah.
Vintage.
It's one of those things that, and this is, again, I don't know if I mentioned it in the live episode, but it's definitely something I wanted to bring you guys on, because you guys are so dug in to those sort of 90s era stuff that I love too. Like, but all those games sort of encapsulated were prior to my time. Like, I mean, a little bit of personal lore for me with collectible card games is, and we were talking about it a little bit before, I one month in Australia walked into a thrift store. And basically, I'd been playing a lot of games like I talked about on my list today, and this is like in 2005 or whatever, and found boxes of things like Galactic Empires. I found things like boxes of Rage. I found things like boxes of like just tons, like, and they were selling them, box $1. And that's how I got into the older collectible card games. Because when you're in Australia, if whether you're from a small town or whatever, that you only get the successful stuff most of the time, unless it's by somebody like Wizards of the Coast that has global reach. Things like Guardians and stuff doesn't land in Australia in the same quantity that you would see in America or something like that. So it was fantastic to sort of go back and discover it. And that's why I love some of the things that you guys said on your list today.
Exactly. It's a hobby that never quits. There's always something else to discover and find. And even games that you've played many, many times or looked at cards over and over and over again, there's always something new if you're looking. And I don't think it's ever going to end. As long as you're looking, you'll find something new.
Yeah, there's so much diversity in the genre. There's so many ways that people were able to infuse so much. And as we're going into this era of some people are calling it a trading card game renaissance. Other people are calling it a gold rush with all these new Kickstarter games and stuff like that. Try them out, whatever. If it looks good, try it out. But again, don't forget that there's these long history of this genre that is beyond just Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. Like, there is a long, rich history of people and designers and stuff like that who created these games that were super exciting and stuff like that. Yeah, it is a genre I love, and I always encourage people to explore it further.
Yeah, and you definitely have the knowledge base that proves that you do love this. I'm impressed by your depth of knowledge.
I appreciate you guys saying that. That's very nice. And you guys as well. You guys obviously, like, we had so different lists, and you guys brought a whole wealth of new stuff that I'm going to check out. I mean, of the games you guys mentioned, let's assume that there was like 8 or 9 games there. I've only played like 3 or 4 of them. So there's some like one-on-one hockey I would have always looked over. I can't wait to dig into it now.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it surprised both of us. Neither one of us, I mean, we're from the United States. We don't, generally as a country, we don't give a shit about hockey.
Unless you're beating the Russian.
Kidding aside, we didn't go into hockey with the impression that we would enjoy it. I don't even know how, we came across, we had it in one of our first hauls. It just happened to be in there. There's some starter decks and a few, I think it was a handful of booster packs as well. And so we opened a couple starters and we just sat down and played that. And we were shocked at how well it played, especially for the time.
Well, puck me, I am impressed that it really blew your minds the way it did. Now let's go out before there. Like I said, I don't know if I said it live on the episode or whatnot, but I had a short list of 40 games that I wanted to talk about. I had to narrow it down to personal favorites. Like I said, this episode was not about what we recommend you go out and try immediately or something like that. But if you like the sound of anything we talked about, check it out. Like that, you find some images online or some deck lists and print and play them, or even jump on eBay. Some of them might still be cheap for now. Just check it out and try these games, because they are really, especially if you're an aspiring game designer or something yourself, there are some great mechanics built in here that you never will see in games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic or Pokemon or anything like that. I do just want to shout out, of my short list, there was a ton of games by companies like Decipher and AEG. I think those are 2 of the most influential companies in the trading card game space ever. And unfortunately, neither of those companies had games on my personal list, but I really wanted to include them. So shout out to those companies. They did amazing work. Anything by, Dave Williams or, Tom Brolick or Rolly Tesh or anything in those sort of 90s era. They did some fantastic stuff. And by all means, I love all those games too. Do you guys happen to have any final thoughts or anything before we go out?
No, well, yes, but I mean, you did say a couple of times that this is very personal. And that's the thing I think a lot of people miss, that there's a lot of fun to be had in any game, really. You take a CCG at all, you can take it out of that, money grab, gotta collect them all, whatever. Spend all your money, be competitive. You can buy a few packs and have fun with virtually anything. And I think we've proven that we can have fun with the dumbest, ugliest looking game you can find anywhere. So.
Yeah, and we often reference in our videos that a lot of the cards, even a box that we open, the entire box is cheaper than taking your family out for a movie and popcorn.
Yeah,
and you get to keep the cards. Those memories of that movie will fade within minutes, if not months. So.
Yeah, but those cards you can always
rub them on the thing.
Grease them up, baby. Once they get in those double sleeves, you can put whatever you want on them. All right, so let's just remind everybody why we're here today. We're here obviously to talk about some of the best collectible card games that we loved ourselves, and also I want to share with people your channel as well. So deaddecks, it is on YouTube. Do you guys have any way that people can find it? How frequently do you guys do videos? Tell us a little bit of an overview of the channel.
We post videos. We're doing 3 a week, about to do 4 a week.
Yeah,
we got a Facebook page that I sometimes remember exists, and a Twitter account that Harry sometimes remembers. We have.
Yeah, it's Twitter is dead_decks. Everything else is deaddecks together, as far as I know. I'm sorry, 2 words, deaddecks, 2 words.
2 words.
We don't. We're not big social media kind of. I'm sorry. What's the word? Post-dated. We're post-dated people. So we find all this technology jargon kind of hard to use. I'm not personally a fan of Facebook. So Richard handles the Facebook. I handle the Twitter. I do the website, which is deaddecks.com, all one word. And I do the uploading and editing of videos. Richard does a lot of scripts and video ideas. And stuff.
I'm the eye candy.
Yeah. And Yeah, the obvious eye candy.
Well, all that stuff is going to be linked in the description. So if you're watching this episode on YouTube, check the description of the episode. If you're watching it, if you're listening to it through a podcatcher, all that again will be listed in the show notes as well. Now, I just do want to say one last thing. Category 1 Games is a fantastic resource for some of the games we've talked about today. If you jump on, they've got things like WC Nitro. They've got a bunch of old games like, Transformers especially. They've got a ton of the games. Almost everything we've talked about today, they sell on there, and they have reasonable prices that are always sort of fair to the market. So check them out. Great customer service. I recommend if you guys are looking to start a collection or interested in any of the games, go on there, buy some bulk, buy some commons, click around. They have a ton of games listed. They really specialize in the classic or dead collectible card games, as we call them nowadays. So again, they'll be linked in the description or show notes of this episode. The last thing I want to do before we go out is one final question for you guys. It's one that I'm really, really nervous about the answer. How did we do today?
Good enough.
Good enough.
That's their tag off on YouTube. Thank you so much, guys. Until next time, goodbye from me. Goodbye from you guys.
See ya.
See ya. Thanks.
Yeah, buddy.
There you go. This has been another episode of The Rare Slot, the bonus episodes of the Booster Pack. Until next time, keep shuffling. And there you have it, our personal top 5 favorite dead collectible trading card games with those fellas from deaddecks. Now, if you want to check out their channel, be sure to find that linked in the description of this episode on YouTube or in the show notes on the podcast episode. There were some great titles there. I really struggled getting it down to 5. And honestly, if you ask me on a different day, that list could be very, very different. I just wanted to include ones that really personally hit home for me. But I want to hear about what your personal top 5 are, or at least your top favorite dead CCGs if you don't get to 5. Let me know either via social media, which is at CCG History on Facebook and Twitter. You can also let me know via our email, which is theboosterpack at CCG History, or reach out to me in the comments on this episode on YouTube. Now, by all means, I would just love to hear what your list is, or even what your favorites are, or what doesn't even make your list. I am always fascinated to hear about what games people love, and always encouraged to hear if there's any that I haven't even tried myself. All right, that's about it for this episode. Thank you so much again for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. It was a little bit different to what we normally do. Let me know how you felt about that as well. Until next time, I've said it once, and I'll say it again. Keep shuffling.